I think the currency is going to fall apart. I think we're going to have to change currency. That decision will have to be made. We're going to wake up and discover there's a new currency in motion. Iran is in the driver's seat. Iran has the initiative. Iran is winning. And Iran is being supported heavily by Russia and China. The world is on the edge of sliding into an economic depression.
Colonel, it is a great pleasure to have you back on the program. Really opportune time to talk today.
Well, that's a nice way of putting it.
Well, we can't be all doom and gloom. We got to be a little optimistic, at least at the beginning. So, there's just so much going on. We've structured a 30-minute conversation here, obviously, and I originally had it mapped out as just a geopolitical conversation, but you reminded me, and I've talked to Jeff Snyder earlier today, we should talk about the bond market and what is happening there. But before we get to, let's say, the breaking news, I just want to put a bow around what's happening on the geopolitical side. I mentioned in the intro, the MOU between the U.S. and Iran expired earlier this week. So far, no news, or at least I haven't seen anything whether there's any progress on either extending the MOU, doing a new or getting a new MOU done, or even a peace treaty. God forbid that happens, right? But I'm really curious what that situation is from your point of view right now. Are we at a stalemate?
No. I think the United States government is in chaos. I think you have a lot of people trying to find a quote-unquote way out for Donald Trump. I think there were people being behind the scenes that Iran would throw him a life-saving jacket or something, that he could essentially point to something and say, see, we've been successful, we can move on now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That hasn't happened. In fact, the opposite has happened. So let's look at it from the standpoint of three perspectives. Let's first start with the Trump administration. The Trump administration wants some kind of agreement that they can point to that satisfies their big donors, the big donors being the Zionist Jewish billionaires who are demanding the destruction of Iran and the conquest of its oil fields and so forth. Not a new development, but now it's acute. And at the same time, you have Donald Trump who wants to get out of this. I worked for him briefly. And the man that I talked with and saw back in 2020 was not at all like the man you see now. And I find it hard to believe that he transformed into a warmongering maniac. I simply think he's doing what he's compelled to do as far as his donors are concerned. But inside the administration, you have some people working on ways to get out. Now, one group, and I can't tell you precisely who they are, but I think there's a group in the Department of Defense, or Department of War, as we say now, that is looking for some military means to rectify the situation. Why? Well, our military is shattered. It's in ruins. We went into this war without actually looking carefully at our own capabilities, and we completely misjudged Iran's. We have a military establishment that has been scaled back dramatically over the last 30 years and is now very much a short war, offensively postured military. That is, it's primarily air and naval power with modest ground force capability. That air and naval power is not designed to fight for longer than a few months. It's now in day, moving towards a year plus, and there's no end in sight. We don't have the national mobilization that would allow us to really surge, convert industry from private sector to public sector, and start producing missiles and unmanned systems and munitions and so forth on the level that we actually need. So knowing we can't do that without a declaration of war and Congress signing on for it, you have people now saying, well, perhaps we should look at tactical nuclear weapons. Tactical nuclear weapons can achieve the desired level of damage and could conceivably frighten the Iranians into signing on for something they would otherwise reject. So that's one group. Another group says, no, we have to talk at lower levels. There are those over there who will still talk to us and try to work our way up. I think they've got a big problem because we killed everyone who was reasonable. What you have now are hard-nosed, hard-line individuals who have family members that were killed in the Iran-Iraq war. Americans conveniently forget we bankrolled Saddam Hussein. We provided him with equipment and advisors. And thanks to us, Saddam Hussein was able to kill hundreds of thousands of Iranians, probably at least 750,000 plus casualties. The Iranians have not forgotten it. Americans don't even know about it. And so these people are now in charge, and they don't see any particular reason to compromise. Now, what does that mean on the ground? Well, right now you're getting about 4 million barrels. Some say 2 million a day, some say 4 million a day out of the Gulf area. Some of that is simply a matter of paying people off. Emirates pay off members of the Iranian Republican Guard Corps. They allow these ships to slip through, go into the Gulf of Oman, offload some of their oil onto bigger tankers and so forth. This is, after all, the Middle East. Come on. We have to expect that sort of thing. But it's not enough to compensate or make up for what's going on. You have the Saudis that are trying to use VLLCCs, these very large container ships that carry a much higher capacity of oil to load up on the west side of Saudi Arabia, Yanbu, and so forth, and then go up through the Suez Canal. None of that is making a dent in the grand scheme of things. China has less demand for oil, but the demand is still high with Korea, it's high with Japan, it's high almost everywhere else. The world is on the edge of sliding into an economic depression. 40% of your sulfur comes out of the Gulf. When you start looking at the criticality of having sulfuric acid for the purposes of refining, whether it's copper or any number of other minerals, you can't overstate it. You can't do much about those things. And so you're back to the group that's talking about tactical nuclear weapons. Now, I have always opposed the use of a tactical nuclear weapon under any circumstances, because one of the things that General Colin Powell said when he was chairman that I fully agreed with was that no one is going to sit there in the Soviet Union, this is back in the 90s, and watch as a tactical nuclear weapon is detonated and say, oh, that's all right. It's a small nuclear weapon. Let's not get excited. His argument was, hell no. If you use any nuclear weapon, they're going to pull the trigger and respond with what they have for fear they're going to lose it. Well, the situation in the Gulf is similar. If you use a tactical nuclear weapon, then everybody says, well, that's it. We can do whatever the hell we want. And suddenly the Russians can use tactical nuclear weapons at will all over Ukraine and potentially Eastern Europe. The Chinese will be horrified, but they'll step up and say, well, then we need to announce we'll use it as necessary. I think it would be a very bad idea, very bad move. So if Trump has anything left from the man I knew previously, he agreed with that and said, no, there will be no use of nuclear weapons. But I don't know if that's still the case or not. So on the Trump side, there's a lot of confusion. And one day he announces, oh, we're talking and we're close to an agreement. The next day, there's none. What's really happening? On the Iranian side, they've said to us very recently, we will talk, but only about an agreement that ends the war definitively. We will not talk about any of those other matters. We want an agreement that ends the war definitively. That's something Trump can't deliver because of his donors, the pressure inside the United States. Now, the interesting part is no one in the United States cares. There's just no one interested in what's going on over there. I have friends up in northern New York, friends out in Oregon. They all say the same thing out here. Nobody cares. They're not even watching what's going on. What are they watching? They're watching inflation. They're watching prices rise. They're watching the cost of fuel, the things that affect them. They don't necessarily tie it together to the extent that I think they should, but that's much more important. Everyone is questioning why Trump won't focus there, because there's no real pressure on him from the American people to do anything in the Persian Gulf. Then finally, we've had another development recently that should not escape detection. The Turkish military sent down some officers to look at various facilities in Syria. They inspected a former airfield utilized by the Syrian Air Force. They took measurements, they surveyed it, made an estimate, and then they left. And shortly after they left, the airfield was completely demolished by the Israeli Air Force. Now, I think what we're seeing is the beginning of the end of something I called a long time ago the modern equivalent of the Nazi-Soviet pact, the pact between Israel and Turkey on what was going to happen in the Levant and specifically Syria. That's breaking down. We should have seen this coming even earlier when we saw this new alignment between Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey. Saudi Arabia has lots of oil, but not much else. The Pakistanis and the Turks need the oil, and by the way, they have a lot of military power, particularly Turkey. And the Pakistanis have always said they would provide a nuclear weapon to the Turks if they needed. So you're dealing with a power in Turkey that is not going to be easily intimidated and is frankly becoming more and more hostile by the day towards Israel. When will this blow up? It's hard to tell, but the Turks have already cooperated with the Iranians against the Kurds. And the Kurds, not all of them, but a very substantial number of them that are hostile to the Turks and to the Iranians, have been subsidized and supported by none other than the Mossad. The Iranians have pretty much bombed that capability out of existence at this stage, but it's still there. And both the Turks and the Iranians, on a limited basis, will cooperate with each other if it's in their interest to do so. All of this should signal danger to the United States, danger to the Israel First crowd, but it's not working. In fact, the opposite is the case. Israel's doubling down on Gaza, it's doubling down on Lebanon. It seems to think that as long as it has control of our armed forces, they can take on and defeat anybody. In the meantime, we have a Navy that's overstretched, undermanned, needs time off, needs maintenance, needs support, can't get it, is pushed to the very limit. We have an Air Force that's flying the wings off of their aircraft. We're now very dependent on bombers that fly all the way from the United States to deliver a substantial punch. This is not a good situation. You can't lie your way out of this. The truth is out there, and the truth is known inside the U.S. Armed Forces, and Americans are beginning to figure out, gosh, what happened? Now, not all of this is Trump's fault. It's been 30 years plus since Desert Storm. A lot of decisions were made under previous administrations and by series of admirals and generals that were very bad, that gutted our capability to do much for more than 2 or 3 months. That's the biggest problem. But Trump doesn't understand that because nobody told him. Hegseth never asked. And the admirals and the generals obviously didn't feel obligated to say much because they all misjudged the situation. Now we have Russia that is in a stronger position than ever. It has all the forces, all the capabilities it needs. You have our friend Putin, who has said, damn it, we're going to accelerate. We're going to bring this to an end. People wanted to hear that in Russia. We're beginning to see evidence for that happening in the south towards Zaporizhia and down into southern Ukraine with Odessa. We have 20 plus thousand North Korean troops who are apparently sitting up in White Russia, Belarus, with thousands of Russian and Belarusian troops. You've got over 1 million men in the Russian army now. There's no reason not to press forward. However, we haven't seen, the axe head, the axe blade, so to say, fall yet. But I think we're getting closer to it. And if we do something stupid in the Gulf, particularly with tactical nuclear weapons, then I would say that operation in Ukraine will go very fast and will be very deadly. Europe is in no position to stop it.
Can I jump in there real quick? Because you just touched on sort of my next question, really, is like the convergence of the Russian-Ukraine conflict and the Middle Eastern conflict. Because when it all started out, it seemed to be two separate events that seemed non-related. But of course, there's party involved on both sides that are in both conflicts. Of course, Russia supporting Iran, China supporting Iran, but then, of course, Ukraine attacking Iranian ships, which I'd say is part of the U.S. side, of course, the Western side. So, like, how closely linked are those two events right now?
The Russians are supplying the Iranians as we speak with enormous numbers of replacement parts, engines for cruise missiles, tactical ballistic missiles, intermediate range ballistic missiles, along with warheads and other things. The Chinese are doing the same thing. We've threatened to do stupid things to Russian ships wherever we find them. We've also threatened the Chinese by implication if they're involved, and we've talked about the Strait of Malacca. All of these things are disastrous for us. We're pushing ourselves into a corner that we cannot get out of. And if we do precipitate a war, we can't win it. We have problems dealing with Iran, a nation of 93 million that lives inside a veritable fortress geographically, but they've already demonstrated they can outproduce us and they can shoot us down practically anywhere we want to show up within 200 or 300 miles of Iran. They have access to all the space-based intelligence and surveillance that they need. We can't defeat that. If you add Russia and China to the formula, you end up with something that I mentioned in my last Substack article. And it was a warning by Brzezinski, no other than the former national security advisor for Carter in the 1990s before he passed away. And he said, If Russia, China, and Iran align and become an alliance, we can't remain on the Eurasian continent for very long. We can't defeat it. They'll be too powerful. Well, I think we're effectively there. We're losing control completely of NATO. Everybody says, well, Turkey's a NATO member. Well, I don't think that's very meaningful for the Turks at this stage. I think the Turks are going to act in their own interest. In other words, we can't manage and fix everything that we've dismantled foolishly and quickly. And the intelligent move is to get out and understand that at home, everybody's going to cheer. You say, look, we've done all that we can do. The Navy's been great. The Air Force is great. We got to get out. We have other more important issues on the agenda for the United States. Everyone from the Atlantic to the Pacific would cheer. But you've got this group of people. Tony Blinken was a spokesman for them. So is Witkoff, so is Kushner, so is Rubio, Hegseth. Who are they speaking for? They're speaking for the same cabal of the super rich who want the destruction of Russia and the destruction of Iran. And they know that if they can't get it, they're probably finished at this point. And that brings us to the financial sector, which is the foundation for all of their influence. 80% of Congress, members of the House, members of the Senate, are somehow or another benefiting financially with cash from the so-called Zionist Jewish Israel lobby. So you can't expect them to do much. And what have they done? Nothing. What if they stood up and said, wait a minute, you didn't consult us. The Constitution says, well, none of that. We haven't seen any of it at all. Because for some reason, everybody thinks it's fine as long as we stay on side with the lobby. We don't want to be on the wrong side. Why? Because the lobby was willing to spend $37 million to drive Thomas Massie, a representative from Kentucky, out of office. That was a big object lesson. Now, I don't think this is going to last. And that's where we get into the financial discussion, because that's something nobody pays attention to. Right now, the average American is just not involved.
Well, that's what the stock market is telling us. The stock market doesn't care about what is happening in the Middle East. And I think that's the perfect segue, Colonel. You opened the door there to talk about what's happening in the main markets, because the S&P 500 near record highs. Oil is somewhat stable, but I agree with you. The second the U.S. would probably leave the region, oil would drop lower. It would be a win-win, in my opinion. And then, of course, you have the bond market, which is reacting to the inflation, which is reacting, of course, to the debt situation in the U.S., the spending, that the military operation, of course, costs as well. And now just today, we've reached a breaking point. Scott Bessent blinked, and they intervened in the bond market. Do you care to elaborate, and how is that linked, and what happened?
Well, I think Scott Bessent has done a number of things since he took over to try and postpone the inevitable confrontation with reality, which is the national sovereign debt. We are headed into a sovereign crisis, if you will. And the dollar has been severely weakened. And when people say, well, the dollar is weak, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I'm not talking about the fact that it's equal to 15 or 20 cents back in 2013 or 1913. That's not what I'm talking about. There is an acute lack of confidence and credibility right now in the United States government. People don't trust us anymore. Remember, we've used our command of the financial system to punish the daylights out of everyone. We've stolen money. We've kept money from Russia. We're keeping money from Iran. What's the first thing that Iran is demanding? Give us our money. What do the Russians want? They want our money. And so what have you seen happening as a result? You've seen this thing called BRICS rise. Well, BRICS right now, which has become a serious financial entity, financial organization centered on China and gold. We don't need to go back through all of that. But it's starting to look like something that could very quickly become an armed camp. That's very dangerous for the United States and the West. Now, when you talk about what Bessent's doing, Bessent wants to keep that market high. He's got orders from Donald Trump, boost the market. How do you boost the market? Well, you do that by controlling the yield curve. Can you control that yield curve? Well, we'll find out, because this is only the beginning. We're talking about $4 billion. There's a lot more at stake than that. But everyone was frightened in Washington when they saw the 30-year Treasury go to 5 point, what was it, 2, 3, 4%? They said, we can't. And if that happens, we have to buy our own debt, because if we don't do that, the market will crash. Well, we've got another problem. We've got the 10-year bond, and that is usually considered the canary in the coal mine. Now we have people saying, no, look what's happening at the 30-year. Well, you can manipulate the 30-year for some period of time, but you can't stop the rise in the 10-year bond. This is a temporary fix, bringing it down by a few percentage points. We're not going to fix anything because we've got the $40 trillion debt, and we refuse under any and all circumstances to cut spending. So what does that mean? It means that at some point, our financial system is going to implode. And there's not a great deal that Scott Bessent can do about it. And he is a very brilliant financial mind, no question about it. But it won't work. We can't postpone this indefinitely. So the real answer in a rational world, if you had one, is to minimize the damage by ending the overseas catastrophe, to scale back dramatically, to scale back your military spending. We're doing the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we're spending more and more, and the deficit keeps growing. Actually, just today, about 20 minutes ago, the U.S. Treasury sold $18 billion of 20-year bonds at a high of 5.204%, with a mildly weak demand or soft demand profile, as what I'm reading here. So
that's a polite way of saying the truth, right?
I'm guessing they're taking it straight from the press release or whatever it is. Yeah. So with soft demand profile, it sounds very nice, very much like cushioning. But the thing is, Scott Bessent intervened the second time in markets within a 2-week period. We've seen the yen intervention, which we're going to talk about in a second, and of course the bond market intervention as well. He's showing his cards. Like, how many cards does he have left? And are the bond vigilantes, or is the market sniffing out the playbook now? Do they know what's coming?
I think the bond vigilantes are gathering. They're the ones at night with torches, running up and down Wall Street in great numbers. I think they're already there. You're asking a question that, Nassim Taleb would say, you can't answer that. This is a question of randomness. Everything could fall apart next week, or it could last until November. I think right now everybody's trying to make it last until November. Gosh, I wonder why. But I don't think
what's happening in November?
Yeah, well, that's right. But how do you balance this failing war, which is strategically already being lost? How do you retrieve it? Use a tactical nuclear weapon? Well, you get a bigger bang. Is that really going to turn things around? Is that going to somehow persuade your opponent to give up? I don't think so. So why do it at all? I mean, how much more do you have to do? They're all going back to 1945 and the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy and the situation that existed then. We don't have that situation right now. Iran is in the driver's seat. Iran has the initiative. Iran is winning. And Iran is being supported heavily by Russia and China. So you're not talking about Japan. Now, you talked about the yen. The Europeans are still angry with us because we used euros. They think that we're now essentially betraying their interests. But can we do what the Bank of Japan has done? I think that's the question. I don't think we can. And I think that's what Scott Bessent's trying to do to a large extent. But it's all internally driven. It's a shell game.
I've been saying that for years now, people watching this channel for a while, because my biggest fear was always the U.S. keeps kicking the can down the road, and in 30 years we're going to look like Japan, 250% debt to GDP ratio, with the exact deflationary pressures that Japan has had. And the yen completely ran into oblivion, like nobody cares about the yen really besides the carry trade. It doesn't have any significance. And then the US dollar would be the same role, but everybody would be fine, which like I've been to Japan a couple of times. It doesn't look like Japan is hurting on a personal level. Of course, economically they could do much better, but it doesn't look disastrous there. So that's where I see the US headed, without, of course, a massive black swan event or you mentioning tactical nuclear weapons being dropped and things like that could completely escalate. Am I too far off? Is that the trajectory that we're headed? Are we going to sacrifice the currency eventually?
I think the currency is going to fall apart. I think we're going to have to change currency. That decision will have to be made. We're going to wake up and discover there's a new currency in motion. I hope somebody's thinking about how to do it. That's my greatest concern.
Well, the Chinese are, it seems.
Yeah, but there's so many little, that's right. There is so little evidence for long-term strategic thinking of any kind in Washington that I don't think they are behind closed doors confronting that particular reality. but I don't see how we avoid it. The other thing that no one is really willing to talk about very much publicly, although I think I've heard people like Ray Dalio and Jeffrey Goodblock mention it, and that is this AI bubble, which is very definitely a bubble. AI is not living up to expectations. Gosh, what a surprise. It sounds like 2008, doesn't it? Somebody said all of this, if you look at it together, means default. That's the ugly word. How do we get out of it? Well, you don't get out of it. You default.
Can I jump in here real quick? Sorry, just to explain it to our audience, because 2008 we had the mortgage-backed security crisis, which was a private credit, or which was a credit crisis, and now we seem to have a private credit crisis. Because people keep comparing the AI bubble to the .com bubble, which seems to be a very different thing, because it's private credit driven right now. I just wanted to explain that to the audience because it's clear to us.
The .com bubble was earlier. What was that, 1999?
2001, yeah.
That's not what we're talking about. No, you're absolutely right. Again, cheap energy and cheap credit are inextricably intertwined. We're losing cheap energy. How much longer do we have cheap credit? Not much longer. When they're gone, our entire civilization is in crisis. We are also not Japanese. Japan has a very homogeneous, highly disciplined people with a uniform culture. And the Japanese are experts at withstanding misery and crisis. We are not. We're not at all like that. This country could erupt in all sorts of different directions. Again, I see no evidence that the president, his administration, or people on the Hill are even remotely thinking about this. So I see us heading into, I hate to be, what's the right word? Go back to another cliche, but it looks to me like a perfect storm. You look at the crashing bond market. How much longer can you prop up the stock market? You have a serious problem overseas as well as here with everything like rare earths. And I mean, how many times have people talked about building rare earth refineries? What have we got? How many times have people brought up the fact that we haven't built a new refinery for various kinds of oil distillates in 30 years, 27 years, something like that? I mean, we are ripe for just a complete massive societal crisis. And I think that's where we're headed. And the notion that a tactical nuclear weapon is the answer to this in any way, shape, or form is lunacy.
I think Europe is way ahead of the U.S. already, by the way. So, in that development department, or in that department.
Well, until we see Merz driven out of office, and some others to go with him, like Macron, and ultimately watch the British finally rise up and rebel, they need a Cromwellian revolution, to be blunt. No. I wouldn't expect much to happen in Europe, but I think to some extent the Russians, who don't always understand us very well and understand Europe very well, I think they've been waiting to see this break in Western Europe, because everyone in Russia knows, I mean, with an education and in the leadership, nobody in Europe wants a war with Russia. Oh. It's just the globalists that are in charge. They're the problem. We have our version of globalists here. They're pushing these wars unnecessarily. And as you say, China, in the meantime, my God, look at China. Look at the gold vaults they've opened. Look at everything they've undertaken to make the renminbi this powerhouse. I mean, it's really astonishing. I must express admiration for China and its achievements. I wish we'd learned something from it.
Well, it seems like they're playing 4D chess, because the petroleum reserves of 1.6 billion barrel, apparently, or even more, we don't even have an exact number, they've outsmarted the West. I think we can agree on that. Like, the West thought we'd get them by the short and curlies by blocking the Strait, and we'll put some pressure on and maybe reshuffle the deck, which brings me to my last question, which is a perfect segue, by the way. Trump-Xi meeting at the end of September 24th. President Xi was supposed to actually attend a UN gathering in New York, but he's only going to the White House now for a single day. He's coming to Washington. What are your expectations for that meeting?
Well, given what I know about President Trump and the people around him, my expectations are low. What should happen is what should have happened the last time they met. There should have been a very frank and open discussion about our currency. Where's the dollar headed? because the Chinese are not, contrary to popular belief, interested in seeing the dollar fail and the reserve currency fall apart. In fact, we may be moving into a world where, for the first time in a very long time, there is no reserve currency. We already had the Japanese and the Chinese doing business in their respective currencies. We're seeing the same thing happen in the Middle East now. So I think this whole idea, well, the petrodollar is dead. That's pretty clear. So what are we going to do about the dollar? And I think the Chinese have an interest in seeing the dollar survive. But in order for us to sit down and talk with the Chinese about how to proceed, we have to accept the facts. We have to acknowledge that China is the leading economic power in the world. But in terms of buying power, they're number one, and that's what counts. But are we prepared to do that? Are we prepared to be humble in any way, shape, or form? We seem to be characterized by leaders who are fraught with ignorance and arrogance. So I'm not sure, even why Xi is bothering. I think we should be grateful that he'll talk to us. All we do is threaten them. All we do is try to harm them. Stupid.
No, you make some excellent points. I wish we could chat much longer, because we have a lot of common denominators as well. We haven't even talked about your investment portfolio. Maybe we'll save that for part two. And cause I'm sure people want to know how you're positioned right now, because I know you like gold, silver, and the miners. So,
well, if I tell people when they ask me, I said, if it comes out of the ground, buy it. Where do you put your money? Food. Put it into who's producing food. That's extraordinarily important. Then you look at all the various minerals. I mean, copper. My God, look at copper. That's going through the roof. So will gold. Gold will hit 13,000 by 2020, I suspect. I think what you're going to see now is a slight downward dip, and then when the things you and I are talking about come to fruition, it'll be straight to the top. And this is going to sound radical, but I think that Bitcoin will recover. I don't think it will go out of business. And I think it'll recover because people will be looking for alternative stores of value. And Bitcoin can provide that. I was a little surprised that Saylor sold off some of his Bitcoin, but then again, he may be over leveraged. And, people say, well, what have you done? I sold everything that I don't have. I rent. I don't have a home anymore. I don't own any real estate. I paid everything off. I'm not a multimillionaire, but for God's sakes, I want to survive too. And then I put what's left where I think it's going to be safe and will ultimately profit. So when I tell people, if it comes out of the ground, buy it, invest in it, I'm not kidding. It's real. Coal is another one. I'm still astonished that we're selling so little coal, because the demand for it in India and China is just staggering. And we have some of the best in the world.
Yeah, some of the cleanest for sure as well. So I was actually going to ask you, I wrote down a similar question about Bitcoin, but we're going too far down that rabbit hole. Even if I just mentioned, I'm sure the comments will just blow up. But I'll save that one for next time, because it'll just completely derail the conversation.
Well,
but
my generation hates it. Everybody my age, but of course, and I don't agree with most of what my age thinks about much of anything. But let's be frank, they just hate, it's ridiculous. It's a psychological op. It's a psyop. Forget it. No, it isn't.
No, fantastic. Colonel, what a wonderful conversation. Where can we send our audience to follow more of your work?
Well, my Substack is Macgregor Warrior Diplomacy. I think people will enjoy that, because in addition to the news that I've been writing over the last few weeks, I put up things that go back 20 years and 25 years. Why? Because we begin to read them, and people said, my God, you said this 25 years ago. You were talking earlier about what you'd said. Well, I'd written these things. They're happening now. So I think a lot of people will find that interesting. I also have a YouTube channel by the same title, Macgregor Warrior Diplomacy. Everything is posted there forever. But also everything I do, including our discussion here, will be posted there. So people have an opportunity to see that I didn't arrive at these conclusions yesterday. I'm not a born again something or other. I've been pretty consistent throughout, but that doesn't mean I can't learn, and I'm perfectly willing to admit I'm wrong if I am. And I hope Jeff Snyder is right. I don't think he is. I think, the bell, for whom is the bell tolling? It's tolling for us, and I think it's going to start tolling very shortly.
I'm leaning your direction as well. Like the signs are there that it's going that direction. Absolutely, I fully agree, Colonel. I tremendously appreciate your time. Thank you so much. As always, a great pleasure. We'll have to do this again.